I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine, and I have Kristi Hugstad with me. She is the author of Be You, Only Better, Real Life Self-Care for Young Adults and Everyone Else, and two other books. She's a certified grief recovery specialist and a grief and loss facilitator for addicts in recovery. She's also the host of the Grief Girl podcast. Welcome to my show, Kristi.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is so nice to have you. Thank you so much for your wonderful book. As I was going through it, I also saw that partly how you started to go, become a facilitator is because you actually had to go through a lot of the process of grief. So could you share with us how was it for you, and what is it that brought you into writing this book? You wrote that when you used exactly what you wrote in the book on yourself to support yourself through the process.
Yes, well, 8 years ago, my husband died by suicide. He ran in front of a train in Dana Point, California, where we lived. And to add to the trauma, his father was a passenger on a train he ran in front of. So I was really struggling after that. I didn't know how to process my grief. So it was a long, hard journey. And I reached a point in my grief journey where I thought, you have two choices here. You can either be a victim of what's happened to you, or you can take what you have learned and you can use that to help other people. So I decided I didn't want anybody else to have to go through what I was going through. I didn't have tools. I didn't have the knowledge. I didn't know the warning signs and risk factors of depression and suicide. So I became very passionate about educating people about those warning signs and risk factors to prevent suicide. And then I realized, my husband was 54 years old, and he'd already bought into the stigma of mental illness. It was really a difficult situation to try to change somebody who's already stigmatized. So then I thought, really what needs to change is we need to start education with our youth. And they need to grow up in a world where mental health is as normal as physical health. Mm-hmm. If we can teach our young people what those warning signs are of suicide and depression, and then they will reach out at an early age to get the help that they need, that's really become my goal to this day.
I love it. I love what I hear from you, Kristi. One of the highest levels of depression and suicide is in the youth, the last years of high school and the first 2 years of college and university. We did a study, actually. I created a model, and we had a study in Cal State Long Beach, and we're creating courses now in different places in order to really look at what's going on. And right after COVID, not after, right in the middle of COVID, we're having higher levels of depression and suicide in that age. So I am so grateful for you to looking into this matter and really focusing on the youth, because like you said, the signs of depression are there, and there are areas and phases of life that we have, such as your husband's, also the stage of life for him is the highest level of suicide, where people also go through phase of life depression. And sometimes if there's a confusion about this is just the phase of life that I'm going through, that I'm going to figure out life, and if I don't have support from outside to support me to figure this out, it can really go south. I can get stuck in that position and not be able to move forward, or that it's really a chemical clinical depression that I need to, have other ways of handling, such as, different methodologies, whether it's medication or transcranial, stimulation or any other thing. Or is it that it's really the way of thinking and the way that I was raised and traumas. So assessing that and then supporting and getting help is one of the key factors that I hear that you're looking at, going and opening yourself up and sharing and letting people know that it's okay. We can seek help.
Well, that's exactly what I'm trying to accomplish by writing all these books on self-care and grief and you know what to do, where to go, risk factors. But the big underlying problem is the stigma. And it's really tough. And I run into that every day. You know, I mean, people, you know, to give you an example, at Bill's memorial, I tried to make it a celebration of life, but the people that attended were so uncomfortable. They didn't know what to say to me. A lot of people avoided me. A lot of people still avoid me to this day because it's uncomfortable for them. If Bill had died of cancer, they would react towards me completely differently. I would have gotten the hugs, I would have gotten the phone calls. And instead, because a lot of people in this day and age buy into that stigma, people are uncomfortable. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. So they stay away and they do nothing. So that's kind of the underlying problem, is to start conversations and abolish that stigma so people like my husband will feel like it's okay to reach out and get the help they need.
When you were living with someone who had the depression in that format, how did you see the stigma stopping them from getting help? Did you know that he had depression? Would he listen to you, or you really didn't know at that time either?
Well, he had been battling depression for about a year before his suicide. And in his mind, he was a burden to me. He really was in no place emotionally to make appointments or try to get professional help on his own. That was too overwhelming. That would have never happened. So I understood that he was in a very dark place. I made appointments with psychiatrists, psychologists, church counselors, social workers, and we went from appointment to appointment. He got different medications, layered one on top of each other. So I was on a mission to find that right doctor, that right professional, or that right magic pill that would bring back my husband to the way he was when I married him. But as far as Bill actually being able to help himself, he couldn't have. He had all he could do to get out of bed and maybe take a shower, eat something. So people really need to understand, if you have a loved one in your life, you need to be their voice. Make the appointments, take them, sit with them. Also, let them know you're there for them in the long run. And that's something I didn't do. I was in such the mindset, I just want to fix him, because a lot of us women are all about fixing, right? And instead of just sitting next to him and saying, you know what, Bill, you are not a burden to me. I love you. I am here for you. We are going to get through this together, no matter how long it takes. So people with depression, more than anything, need that reassurance from their loved ones that you are there for them no matter what.
Mm-hmm. There's also, I know Dr. Michael Yapko wrote a book that depression is contagious. Have you also experienced being beside your husband, and there was a part that you wanted him to support you, that you wanted to support him, you wanted to have his engagements, conversations, you know, all of that. And how was it for you to be beside someone who is going through such a deep clinical depression beside you? And maybe if you could share that people in our audience who are listening and also like feeling that, yes, they do have a spouse, a child, a parent, a friend, someone who they're living and very close to. And like you said, no matter what they do, they can't get out. But how is it also on you? Not only how you were for him, the impact on you as someone who's beside someone who has the depression?
I really was in panic mode for about a year. I was running on adrenaline. I knew that it was up to me to find him the help that he needed. So I didn't really sit still enough to really process what was happening, because for most of us, when we're in it, we don't even realize how stressed and how our anxiety levels are through the roof, because we are so fixated on helping our loved ones that we don't even realize the toll that it's taking on us personally.
Yes. And how was it for you when he committed suicide? Because I think that what I've also experienced with a lot of my clients as I work with them for the past 30 years, it's a lot of feeling of guilt, feeling of what else could I have done? How could I have prevented it? It's a very different experience than a natural cause death. Somehow we're always thinking that we should have intervened somehow. And the same way you say that we should intervene at the stage of life, which is their depression, how does this same concept of I should have intervened stayed with you after he committed suicide?
The very first emotion that I felt was guilt. I wasn't in shock. I wasn't in denial. I had been dealing with this for over a year. He talked constantly about not wanting to live, about taking his life on a daily basis. So I didn't ever really think that he would follow through. I thought maybe it was just a cry for attention. But when I got that first phone call telling me that Bill had taken his life, my initial reaction was guilt. What could I have done differently? I didn't find him that right professional. I didn't get him that magic pill. I failed him. I didn't contact the right doctors. So I blamed myself. I took 100% responsibility for his death. And it took me quite some time to move past that. So yeah, I was pretty textbook. I assumed all the guilt myself.
I remember, I want to share this story with you and everyone. I remember working in an inpatient recovery and inpatient hospitalization, which we had a lot of suicidal clients where the family, had called and they 5150 them. So we were a locked unit and you were taking, it was a huge team of 3 psychiatrists and all of us therapists and, the psychology nurses, and we would do this teamwork. And then we had this one lady who was with us for almost 6 weeks. And we worked through the whole gamut. Everybody said, they're going to write off on her. It was all great. Her sister got her a cat. So her sister was involved with her. We already got everything that when after all of these attempts, that she was in a very solid place as she was going to go. So we discharged her. And at that time I was in Northern California. She went onto the bridge and threw herself out right after. And I remember all of us professionals were sitting there going, what happened? Like we thought the treatment was going well. We thought everything was going well. And at one point, Kristi, we all had to come to a place of, we just need to respect the person's decision. And I know for many years, I worked with suicidal clients, which, by 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm still having them go to the hospital and be assessed and, do all of that. So I totally get when you say the first thing is for us to feel guilty. And then yet it's their decision. We did all that we can for someone, but it's their life and it's their decision, and honor them for who they are. And I think that might also take away the concept of the stigma off of someone, not only the person, but also the family members of someone who decided to commit suicide. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think in my case, I'm speaking personally, I think that Bill had made that decision long ago. I also think that during his depression, he could step up and be the great pretender. His parents came to visit, and he was very quiet, but he could engage socially, at least put up a front, very little communication. But he would go through the motions of being okay. So I think it's important for your listeners to know that they can sometimes step up and be the great pretender when they have to, if it serves them.
Mhm.
I also think, he went along grudgingly to a lot of these appointments with psychiatrists and psychologists. I would have to coax him to get in the car. I would go and fill a prescription. And it almost seemed like he had a sense of calm about him, like he was just kind of appeasing me and going along with it because he knew how hard I was trying. So it's really hard for those of us with a healthy mind to understand how dark of a place somebody is actually in that has that type of depression, that they no longer want to be here, that all they want to do is end the pain. And the only way that they can think that will stop that pain is to take their own lives. We can't imagine that. And when I think back of the darkness and that deep pain he must have been in, there's a part of me that kind of understands,
Absolutely.
right? I mean,
Absolutely.
if we are in that kind of physical pain, the quality of life is zero. And that's temporary. So to have that kind of ongoing emotional pain and trauma day in and day out, I can't even fathom that.
Yeah. No, I hear you. For many years, as I worked with suicidal patients, I remember just sitting and listening and going to the depth of their kind of like darkness that they're sitting. And going into their world, I could totally understand that they just wanted this to end. And there was no hope, there was no light. And it was very, I mean, my job is to create light. And sometimes you kept sitting there and you're like, I don't know how to anymore. And sometimes it's just waiting and buying time. Sometimes we're just buying time until something changes, another level of passion shows up. But I think that sometimes they are in a hopeless, helpless place. And sometimes us around them, whether we're the doctors or physicians or mates or, family members, sometimes we also go into the same type of powerlessness and hopelessness with them, because that is the actual concept of a depression, the hopelessness and the powerlessness. So, but the other side of it is, as I hear you, and I've also experienced this, maybe if we could intervene early enough that we could shift something. And that's what your book is about, is for each person to really look at, if I'm going through something, how can I find help? How can I support myself? And then for people who are around me. One of the great tools that you offer in your book is journaling. How did journaling help you?
That is the very first self-care tool that I put into action. I was told, I got professional help after his death because I had no idea how to process my grief. And we all hear, oh, writing things down really helps you. And you hear it, but until you actually do it and experience what it does for you, you don't understand. So I just started writing. Actually, I was putting my anger down on paper. And it needed a place to go. I needed to get that out. I needed to validate that it was okay that I was feeling that way. And what was really interesting is after about 6 months, I would journal every day. The interesting thing is, and even to this day, when I would start over and start from day one, it was really insightful because I was able to realize, you know what, you are moving forward in your grief journey. You no longer have all that anger. You go back and forth. I mean, it's still a roller coaster ride, but you are not in that deep, dark place that you were in on page 1. So it also kind of gives you a little roadmap of where you're at in your grief journey, but it really serves as a place to put down your emotions and validate that it's okay to feel that way.
Yes, and you brought a lot of the scientific aspect of journaling. My experience also has been that sometimes when we just think, we go around a loop. You know, we do the circular thinking, and we don't really necessarily release anything. And journaling allows us to release very quickly about, you know, and you brought a lot of the scientific aspects of, you know, what it does in the brain and how, you know, it brings the two aspects of the brain together. But you just mentioned something that I think is fantastic, which is people in the emotional process, most of the time don't know how they're moving ahead. It's as if, you know, you're in a dark tunnel and all you see is darkness. And sometimes in the therapy, I have to remind them that, no, you're moving this far. You are, you know, these are some of the things that are different between what you said last week and this week. Although in their world, they're just repeating the same thing over and over again. But if you are journaling, you could see the movement of what you had shared a week ago and 2 weeks ago versus today, even though it might be about the same concept, but the way you say it, the way maybe the energies are lifting, they're becoming lighter. And each one of those would also show you that you are going, you know, from the darkness of the tunnel and there is a light and you're getting closer to the light that is out there.
Well, in the beginning too, the first couple weeks, I didn't go anywhere. I couldn't imagine getting in my car and driving to the grocery store. That would just have been too overwhelming. So as I was processing my grief and moving forward slowly, I actually started engaging in my life again. And initially, I couldn't imagine, you know, I had all I could do to take a shower, go make a cup of coffee. So, you know, I now realize that that's okay. I should have been a little more gentle on myself and allowed myself that luxury of, you know, it's okay. You have been through a major trauma. So lower your expectations of yourself right now. You know, start from where you're at and take baby steps because this is a journey and
Yes.
it's going to take some time.
Yes. You talk about sleep. It's so important because I do agree that most of the people that I've worked with also going through trauma, especially also losing someone, their sleep pattern really goes off. So you see people who don't want to face the reality and they would just go to sleep hours after hours and then they go through an insomnia. And then I've worked with people who immediately go into insomnia and they have irregular sleep and they can't process well when you can't sleep that way. Can you share a bit? You brought that also into your book and how much this is important and how to do that.
Well, sleep is probably the most important self-care tool that there is because you and I both know that if you don't get a good night's sleep, the next day you have brain fog. That's when you get in little fender benders. You can't find your keys. You make mistakes. You miss appointments. So it affects your entire life. And you're also a lot more emotional. Those are the times when you are sleep deprived where you blow up over absolutely nothing or you start crying at a commercial on TV. I mean, you are not yourself when you don't get adequate sleep. And, you know, after about 48 hours, you actually can start to hallucinate. So you are not yourself when you are sleep deprived. So it's so important to make sure because you're already going through all this trauma and this grief, and it's only going to be compounded if you do not get adequate sleep. So that is so important.
We also talk about in being in nature and enjoying and kind of healing through nature. I know many people who had to leave their home in the time of grief and just go out of country or go to another space where it was a different space than the same home that they had their loved ones there, and they had to go through a visual constant trauma. How was that for you? Did you need to live in the same place, move away? And how did, like, kind of like movement and nature and all of that support you?
Well, that's a really good question, because I live up on a bluff, and all throughout the day, I hear train whistles. And since Bill died by train, that was such a huge trigger for me that whenever I would hear the train whistle, I got so anxious, and I would just stop, and I couldn't function. So I thought, I've got to move. I can't be here. I can actually, from my place, see the train tracks where he died. So that compounded with the actual train whistles, I thought, I need to move somewhere where there are no train tracks, no trains, so I don't hear the train whistles. And when I thought about it, I thought, well, where in the world would that be? I don't know that, unless I move, in a really remote area. I think that would be really almost impossible for me to do. So then I realized, I've got to start changing the way I think about this. I have control over my thoughts. And instead of thinking of that train whistle and as a trigger and a reminder of how Bill died, I decided that I would think of that as Bill's way of greeting me and saying hello. Mm. And you know what? It works. I hear train whistles all day. I live in the same place. And I, of course, could never drive by the place on the tracks where he died. I couldn't do that for a year. And now I realize, it's okay. Yes, he did die there, but, you can't go around the world to try to avoid this area. You need to drive that route. So I just don't look, and I turn the radio on and I distract myself, but I don't try to avoid those triggers anymore. I didn't move, but it started with changing the way that I think. And that started off with, whenever I see triggers, I'll see Bill's car, the car that he drove, this red and white or black and white FJ Cruiser. And I'll see this big guy behind the wheel. And the first time I saw that, I stopped. I slammed on the brakes, and it stopped me dead in my tracks. And now I think that person behind the wheel reminds me of Bill, and it brings a smile to my face. So you have to stop and think, I'm going to change the way that I think about this.
It's like, yes, it's almost like everything that would remind me of him, instead of going to the sad place, I'm going to let all of these triggers to remind me of the beauty of him.
Yes, and then I have so many happy memories. And I remember being down at the beach, and I saw somebody walking towards me that was dressed and looked exactly like him. And I just stopped. And of course, he was approaching me, and I was just staring at him. And he said, "Are you okay?" And instead of, running away or acting all flustered, I just said, "You know what? You just caught me off guard because you remind me so much of my ex-husband." Mm-hmm. And he said, "Well, tell me about him." And he walked with me, and he listened to my story, and he lives in my neighborhood, and now we're friends. So, there is beauty in these moments, and you just have to turn the situations around and look at it a little bit differently.
Very much. You talked about cutting down on sugar. Say more about that.
Well, my book, when I started out, as we discussed, I wanted it to be mainly for self-care for young adults. I'm also a credentialed teacher, health teacher, and young adults, teens, we all hear, you need to eat healthy, eat from the 4 food groups, eat more leafy green vegetables, more fruit, add fiber. We've heard this time and time again. So I decided instead of that, let's start out with the most important thing. Just cut back on your sugar. If you're eating healthy and you're drinking 8 cans of Coke a day, you're not healthy, right? So let's make this simple and just start with the number 1 culprit in your diet, which is sugar. So if
Yeah.
you can cut back on that, then you're going to be able to have a healthy, nutritious, balanced diet.
Kristi, when I was in high school, I think for a couple of months, I was drinking 16 cans of Cokes, plus 16 cans of Coke, and I think chocolate bars with it.
Wow. Well, did you notice? I don't know if you saw in the sugar chapter, I break down exactly what is in 1 can of Coke or cola, 10 teaspoons of sugar. And what happens when you consume that large amount of sugar is you get that little sugar high, but then after 20 minutes and an hour, you crash, and then you need another can of Coke. So if you were having 16 cans, you had a huge sugar addiction, and you kept consuming it to get that sugar high, and then you kept crashing.
Yes.
And that is so unhealthy.
I still have the addiction. I'm just monitoring it because I don't think that addiction, when it develops, it goes away. So it's just constant monitoring that type of, sugar need. So it is so important that, for parents to actually create a diet which has a little bit more balance, and to be, for their teens and young adults to really know that. And young adults also start with alcohol, which has, again, high levels of sugar in there. So that's such an important factor to be mindful of.
Well, absolutely. That's why at the end of that sugar chapter, I have a sugar log, because the first step in cutting back is to be aware. If you had filled out that log and you calculated 160 teaspoons of sugar a day, plus the sugar addiction was compounding itself, so you were having candy bars, I think that would have probably shocked you. So I make the reader responsible for logging and figuring out how much sugar are you actually consuming. Let's learn to read labels, and let's take a real close look here.
Yes. You also go in your book and explain different aspects, such as how to maintain relationships, healthy relationships, managing your money. You created a budget worksheet. And then, then you go into a place of attitude. So what I like also about your book is very hands-on. You give specific skills and the shift of attitude at the end about, how to be grateful, but how to be mindful, how to install hope, how to have the vision and move forward. So it really, really gives the young adult not only a practical tool, but also in how to shift their mind and their brain and their body into reaching an optimum health. And to me, is almost like, if I can be responsible for myself and have the skills to be responsible for me, then I can see if there is anything going on with me that is not up to par, then I can get help. So it's more like, let me be responsible and do these skills. If by me doing all of that, there's still something going on that I cannot handle by myself, I need to get help.
Well, yes, and at the second half of each chapter in the book, I give the science behind why the self-care tool works, because I think it's important. Most people are pretty black and white. They want to know why I'm asking you to do this. What is this going to do for me? So it's actually going to change your brain chemistry. So that's incentive for people to actually do these, follow through on these self-care tools. If it raises those feel-good hormones in your brain, those neurochemicals, the dopamine, the serotonin, the oxytocin, if those neurochemicals are raised, you're going to feel better and you're going to be in a better mood. You're going to be of more benefit to others. So I think the main thing about all this self-care is it changes your brain chemistry. And that's what you need to ward off depression, right? So if you keep your brain healthy, it will help ward off depression so that you don't get those suicidal thoughts, so that your self-confidence and your self-esteem stay high and elevated where they should be. So it's not just, me telling you to take care of yourself and here's how to do it. I also want to give you the science behind why it works. And that hopefully will help you not get to a state where you really need professional help. So it's all about prevention.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you said at the beginning of the book that you utilized every step that you've actually put in here for yourself, and you've watched yourself come and heal from the grief. So how are you now? And what brought you, and what was the process? I know we talked about right after the trauma and, what you had gone through your grief, and what were the process of you coming to your healing?
I'm at the point right now where I've accepted my loss. It's a part of me. I used to want to detach from it and get away from it and move on with my life without the trauma. But now I realize you can't do that. That's not going to work. So the best thing to do is embrace what's happened. And it's a part of you. It always will be. And move forward and take your tragedy with you, because your grief changes and evolves. And it's okay that that's now a part of your new normal. So I'm at the place where I've accepted it. I stopped blaming myself. I stopped feeling guilty. But it came from the process of understanding what mental illness is really all about. And when you don't understand what that process is, you own it and you take it personally. And that was a big part of my journey. So I'm at the place right now where I feel like I've learned and grown from my grief and my trauma. I'm a lot more compassionate. I have a lot more empathy. I do grief counseling. I talk to people mainly who have experienced a suicide because I'm not afraid of it. I've been there. I understand. So I think I am now at a place where I'm a better person because of my experience.
In 1 minute, if there's anything we haven't shared, then you really want our viewers and audience to.
I think the main thing is, a lot of people think that self-care is selfish, and it's not. You need to take care of yourself, put yourself first, emotionally, spiritually, socially, financially, mentally, before you can really reach out and be of service and help other people. So just like they tell you on the airplane, put your own oxygen mask on first before you can help other people. And that's true in life.
Kristi Hugstad, everyone. Be you, only better. Real life self-care for young adults and everyone else. And find that in Amazon. Where can they find you, Kristi?
The best place to find my stories and blogs and all my books is at my website at thegriefgirl.com.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Take good care. And for all of you who are out there, create an amazing life for yourself and everyone around you. Until next week, bye.